Hi, everyone. But I am thrilled to be here, and thank you so much to GMAT Club for having me on the session today. And I appreciate you all also spending your Friday with me. Um, I know that it's a busy week, and no matter where you're joining me in the world, whether it's first thing in the morning or whether this is closing out your week, I appreciate it, and I promise that we have some great content in store for you today. So I think we can just dive right in. This is a topic that feels like it's been about 8 years in the making. And that's how long that I've been at the helm of Vantage Point. And it's a really important question. I speak to prospective applicants as well as our clients on a daily basis. And school selection is a really, really big decision and a big part of the application process. And I hear on an almost daily basis questions surrounding the value of an MBA overall, but then more specifically, what is the value of an MBA if it's not Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, right? And what does it look like if I only apply to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton? So whether or not you're just starting in your application process or you've already decided maybe that those are the 3 schools for you, I'm here to sort of shed some light on some different ways to think about this question and hopefully to give you some additional food for thought as you make the right decision for you. So let's get into it. Like my screen says, I'm Melody Jones, and I'm the president and co-founder of Vantage Point MBA Admissions Consulting. A little bit about my background, because I think it's very important to this topic, is that I am a top MBA grad myself. I went to Columbia Business School, class of 2013. And so a lot of the information I'm sharing with you today also comes from my own experience, right? And admittedly, I am biased because I did not graduate from Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, and obviously believe that there's a ton of value in the education and the experience that I received. And so I will be sharing that with you, but also, and probably more importantly, I've been an admissions consultant for a decade now. And together with my team, I've advised hundreds of applicants, and the large majority of them do and are and have applied to Harvard or Stanford. I actually looked at the numbers in preparation for this presentation, and about 75% of our clients annually applied to Harvard and or Stanford. And if you add Wharton to the mix, that number is even higher. So this is not a presentation that is going to dog any of those MBA programs. They're incredible programs. Anyone who is fortunate enough to be accepted would be incredibly lucky to attend. But this is more a presentation on giving you the permission and some reasons to cast a wider net and think more broadly about school selection. And then lastly, I just want to leave you with a little bit more sort of information and a plug on my firm and sort of what we do, because I think that lens is very important in terms of how that informed the content I'm sharing with you today. And that's just the reason why we're in this business and the reason why I get up every day and feel incredibly fortunate and grateful to be in the business that I'm in. And that's because I truly believe in the transformative power of a top MBA. And together with my team, we're on a mission to transform the lives and careers of ambitious individuals like yourselves, young professionals who have big hopes and dreams for their careers, and see an MBA as an important catalyst to that. And with our services, we help our clients overcome the odds and outperform their success rates and acceptance rates to the top programs. So with that said, why are you all here today? What can you expect to get out of this presentation? I always like to start every presentation with what's in it for you, because I think it's incredibly important for you to know why this is worth spending another 45 minutes with me. So first, I'm going to ground us in reasons to pursue an MBA. Why would you pursue an MBA in general? What can you expect to get out of it? What are some good reasons that people consider leaving a potentially lucrative career to go back to school and to explore other options? And what are some not so great reasons to pursue an MBA? And maybe if those are what's driving you, you might want to reconsider your decision or do a little bit more soul searching before taking that next step. Next, we're going to sort of unpack and address the top 4 common objections or criticisms or concerns that I hear around an MBA that is not Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton. And we're going to walk through some counter arguments to why you should potentially think more broadly and give some other programs a chance. And then lastly, I think examples and real life people are the greatest proof points in the world. And so we're going to end with a fun little exercise and walk you through some quick case studies on some of our actual clients who've gone to a range of MBA programs, and you can see sort of how things worked out for them. All right. So I had some fun animations created in this presentation, but with the platform, I'm not able to use them. So I apologize if some of these slides are a little bit busy, but want to kind of walk you through the logic for each one and ground us in some really important context so that everything else that I'm presenting to you today is going to make sense. And so I think it's really important to first ground ourselves in what is a top MBA, right? I am not making the case today for any MBA in the world. I am particularly creating an argument for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton versus another slightly larger subset of MBA programs that I believe offer fairly equal outcomes and opportunities and value. But just to be clear on the definitions, right? We have Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. That's HSW. I love acronyms, and I find myself using that one on a daily basis. If you want to broaden the umbrella a little bit more, we can add 4 other MBA programs to the mix. And these are considered colloquially as the M7 or the Magnificent 7. That includes MIT Sloan, HBS's friendly neighbor. You have Columbia Business School in New York, and then the 2 Chicago schools, Kellogg and Booth. Together, those are the M7 programs. And then what I will consider to be the larger group of top MBA programs that includes other top schools like Yale, like Tuck, like Haas, et cetera. There are probably a few in here that I might have left out, and you're like, oh, what about Macombs? Or what about Georgetown, right? Like, this is not a hard and fast list, but this is generally representative of what I would consider to be a top MBA. And this is, of course, the sample set that I'm using for some of the analyses that I'll be sharing later in the presentation. Okay, so busy slide here, but I'm going to walk through these one by one. And I think once you're clear on what we mean by a top MBA and sort of making the case for any of these top MBA programs, it's really important to also be clear on why you would go to business school and what are some of the common reasons that people go to business school and what are good reasons to go back to school and to leave your job, potentially pack up your stuff and move to a different city, and how you can start thinking about those in terms of making your own decision. So number one reason, this is number 1, 2, and 3 probably, but that's just income, right? Hopefully that's not the only reason why you're pursuing an MBA, but in many cases, that is the initial impetus for you to consider an advanced professional degree like an MBA. And that's simply because the fact is that graduates from top MBA programs can expect to more than double their salaries within 3 years of graduation. Those are very, very attractive returns on investment. And of course, those are essential also to actually make an MBA worth it because the price tag of an MBA is also quite high. But thinking about what that financial return is on your investment, income is a big one. It's been proven. There's been tons of data, of course, that's out there published for your perusal to prove that point. The second major reason, this was my personal reason for pursuing an MBA, and actually in a recent GMAT survey, about 42% of applicants on average are pursuing an MBA for this reason, and that's to pivot careers. It is well known and proven that an MBA from a top program, not only Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, simply opens doors to companies that have defined recruiting tracks, and that gives you a platform to pivot into a new industry or even a new function in a way that recruiting on the ground simply cannot. And that's because companies hire for specific roles out of MBA programs. Many organizations will have actually leadership development programs and defined tracks for MBA grads. And so particularly if you're interested in going into one of those more defined career paths, an MBA is an excellent way to sort of hit a reset button on your career path so far, level up your education, and take that left turn with confidence. If you're not looking to pivot careers, most likely the reason why you're drawn to business school is simply career progression. Maybe you didn't study business at undergrad, and after a few years in the workforce, you're starting to see some gaps in your skills or some opportunities to really shore up your strategic thinking and your decision-making skills and to really round out that business acumen. And you really see an MBA as a longer-term investment that's going to help you be successful and perform at your highest level as you increase in responsibility and, of course, take on greater leadership roles at your organization. And that brings me to the next point, which is leadership development. I apologize for the formatting issues there. But leadership development is a big reason why people consider business school as well. Now, business school is not only a leadership development boot camp, right? There's a whole lot more to it. But leadership development is a core component of a top MBA, and not only through classroom content, but also through group projects, experiential learning opportunities, and certainly just exposure to diverse people, diverse experiences, diverse perspectives that help you understand others better, help you be more empathetic, and help you reach from greater diversity of perspectives and information in making decisions and in leading your teams in the future. The fifth reason why people go back to business school is this is the I love school bucket. This is for folks that just love going back to school. They love learning. They see the intrinsic value in getting this education. And I know this might sound like a luxury, and in many ways it absolutely is. But there is a ton of unquantifiable value in going back to school, investing in your own learning and education, and having some of the flexibility to pursue subjects and classes that are interesting to you simply because they're interesting and you have that curiosity, not because you necessarily need to leverage that to go make money in the future. And that's a very valid reason. And last, but certainly not least, is the network. You've heard this talked about a million times. I think any MBA grad that you meet, myself included, will tell you that the network is the gift that keeps on giving from your MBA program. And that takes a wide variety of forms. But simply put, these are friends, these are business contacts, potentially mentors, future business partners, anything in between. That are going to be a part of your career and possibly part of your personal life for the rest of your life. And so whether you have entrepreneurial aspirations, it might be seeking fundraising or a business partner or mentorship in the future, or maybe you'll be recruiting for a job in 3 years and 5 years, and you want to be able to make connections and to speak with folks who are already ingrained in an industry or an organization. Again, that's really the value of the network, and I can't understate how much that will make a difference in your career in the long term, just as much as in the short term. All right, so now I just shared with you 6 good reasons to go to business school and 6 reasons that if these are what's driving you, you will 100% get what you're going there to get. Now, what is an MBA not? What are some potentially not so great reasons why an MBA should be on your radar? So number 1 is an MBA is not just a really expensive job placement service, right? If your only goal is to break into X industry or land X job, you're really, really overpaying for the experience, and you might be better off just networking your butt off, maybe pursuing a very specific advanced degree if you have a major skill set gap, and in using the services of a great recruiter. Business school is not just about what that first job is you land after business school. Actually, most graduates are not in that first job within 2 to 3 years after graduating. So you want to make sure you're really taking that long-term lens. And if your lens is more short-term, there might be other cheaper and honestly more time-efficient avenues to get into that end goal. Number two is an MBA is not somewhere to go figure out what you really want to do. You know, an MBA is certainly a transformative experience. And you don't know what you don't know, and you're going to learn and be exposed to a lot in business school that you can't even fathom right now. That said, you need to have a clear sense of direction from the day you set foot on campus. And earlier, to be honest, without a clear sense of direction, your application is going to be in jeopardy. But even if you're able to fake it in your application, once you get to school, if you don't really know what you want to do and you don't really know what you're interested in and what you're going after, you're just going to be tossed around like a ship on the waves. You really do need to have a clear sense of direction, because it's going to make you a better student. And honestly, it's going to make sure that you get the most bang for your buck and the most value out of the MBA degree once you're there, because time flies by. Even though it's 2 years, it's going to go by just like that. All right, an MBA is not somewhere where you go take a break and recharge. Business school is just as busy as you are now. Yes, it's a different kind of busy, but it is not a vacation. And if you treat it like a vacation, you're definitely overpaying. And so really think about what you're hoping to get out of the experience, and hopefully it's a little bit more substantive than that. And then lastly, an MBA is not a career progression magic carpet. Now, I know I might be speaking out of both sides of my mouth, because I just told you on the previous slide that an MBA is a great place to go and have doors open and give you access to industries that you could pivot into without specific prior experience. And yes, that is correct. But an MBA is not going to carry you throughout the rest of your career and give you a secret silver bullet to the C-suite. At the end of the day, and I'm going to talk about this at several other instances throughout this presentation, your experience, your accomplishments, your proven track record are going to be way more important and honestly way more indicative of your future trajectory than the specific degree will be. So while an MBA opens doors, you certainly have to walk through those doors yourself, and you have to continue to earn your spot once you've walked through. Okay, so now you have an understanding of why you should be thinking about business school and what are some not so great reasons for considering business school. So once you've made that decision for yourself and you've sort of identified the few reasons that resonate most with you, what schools do you want to apply to? What schools should be on your list? Excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink of water. And so, of course, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, those are the 3 most popular MBA programs in the world, and certainly in this country. And it is very common to hear and very common to even think, particularly at the beginning of the application process, that, you know, for me, it's Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or bust, right? And so here I've identified the top 3 objections, if you will, that I hear, or put another way, justifications that I hear for why it's only Harvard or Stanford or Wharton for someone. And I'm going to walk through each one and sort of break it down a little bit, and then we're going to go through each one in greater detail and provide a counter argument. So the first one is cost, right? Always starts with the money. The most common criticism I hear is that a non-Harvard, Stanford, Wharton MBA just isn't worth it to me. It's not worth it for me to leave my job. It's not worth it for me to jeopardize job security. I'm not worth the opportunity cost if it's not one of those 2 schools, or 3 schools, my apologies. The second argument is around relevance, right? I don't think this is actually going to help me in my career if it's not Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton. Not that many people at my company went to business school, or there's only people who went to business school at Harvard or Stanford in my industry or at my company. So we're going to debunk that one as well. Thirdly is around reputation. The argument that, well, outside of those 3 programs, you know, the other schools aren't really well known in my industry, or they're not really well known in my home country where I eventually hope to return and work. And then lastly, and this is my least favorite, is it simply anything that's not Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton isn't the best, right? It feels like I'm settling. It feels like I'm going for something that isn't the top choice, it isn't the cream of the crop, right? Going back to that cost at the top, right? It's just not worth it unless it's X. And so I have a little bit of motherly advice on that one particularly. All right, so let's break down the cost first. I know this is a very busy chart. I'm going to kind of talk you through each column one by one to walk you through my math. When I was developing this presentation, I sliced and diced this analysis 20 different times and ultimately just decided that simple is best. I will preface this by saying that yes, this is oversimplified. No, you should not rely on this analysis only in making your decision. And yes, this is illustrative, and I'm going to walk you through my rationale for this. So in the second from the left-hand column, you just have the cost of attendance. This is the cost of attending any of these top MBA programs for 2 years. It includes tuition and fees, as well as the published cost of living budget by each school. And the next column, you have average post-MBA compensation. These are published by all of the schools. This is the average comp package that's offered to graduates of each of these MBA programs. And then the next column is your average comp increase. And that's an important number because that's showing how much that average post-MBA comp is increased from your pre-MBA comp that you'll include in the application form that you submit to each school. So as you can see, for all of these programs, graduates can expect to more than double their pre-MBA compensation after graduation. But where this becomes important is comparing the cost of attendance with the average comp increase. And so what I simply did here was I divided the cost of attendance by your average comp increase, which is really your simplified ROI from this degree. And I said, okay, how much time will it take me to break even on this investment? 2 caveats here. No, I did not include the opportunity cost. And that's because the opportunity cost is the same for you, no matter which school you attend. So it's a little bit of a moot point. And 2, I didn't include any financing considerations, right? So whether you pay cash, whether you took out student loans, et cetera, that was not also included in this analysis. But what's really important here to look at, and that's the column highlighted in blue, is that for any of these degrees, no matter which one you choose, it basically takes 2 years to break even on this investment. 2 years, right? 2 years in, 2 years out. And then the great news is that comp isn't going away, right? That comp is going to, at worst case, stay the same, if not continue to increase as you progress in your career, as you put your skills to use, as you continue to network your way into better and higher paying jobs, et cetera. So it does compound from there. But my point here is that from a value standpoint, Harvard and Stanford and Wharton aren't even the best bang for your buck, right? Michigan Ross is. And as you go down the list, Cornell Johnson is a very close third, right? No matter which programs you're looking at, it's going to take you about a little under to a little over 2 years to break even on that investment. And so this notion that anything besides Harvard, Stanford, Wharton isn't worth the cost, here are the numbers. And the truth is that is not the case when you look at the averages. One other thing I'll even add on to this analysis is that many companies that are sort of MBA recruiting heavy hitters, if you will, have structured and standardized compensation packages across all of the schools. And so, for example, let's take the top consulting firms, right? McKinsey, Bain, BCG. What they're offering as a starting salary and a signing bonus is going to be the same whether you're recruited out of Darden or whether you're recruited out of Harvard. And so just something to keep in mind when you think about kind of the ROI and is this worth the cost? Each situation is absolutely individual, and I'm not saying that this applies across the board in any way. This is just illustrative to show you that compared to each other, these programs all offer an extremely tight and similar ROI and payback period. All right, so my next argument, if you will, is around relevance, right? And this one is just going back to saying, well, I don't know if an MBA is really necessary to progress in my career. Do I really need it, right? And no, maybe you don't need it. But one thing that I want to come back to here is just around the argument of correlation versus causation. And this is more difficult to prove with data, so I have to go with anecdotal information. But I can tell you what I know from experience. I can tell you what I know from following my clients over the years. And like I said earlier, going to HBS or Stanford or Wharton, for example, is not a career magic carpet, right? In any different way than any of the other top MBA programs on my list would be. Students who go to Harvard or students who go to any of these top programs are superstars, and that's why they got in, right? They already have this high likelihood of success. And so if that's you, then you've already won kind of 80% of the battle. And it's not really going to change whether or not you went to Harvard or whether or not you went to another top MBA program. And so my point here is that just because you go to one of those schools doesn't mean that it's going to cause you to be more successful. Even if you look around and you say, well, it does seem like around me, these folks who went to these schools are more successful than folks who went to that school. You're going to find data points and exceptions to any of these observations that you make. But just remember that, again, folks who go to these programs already have a higher likelihood of success in the first place. And so it's not as much that going to that school is what propelled them in that direction. It's that they got into that school because they were already self-propelled in that direction. And the other point I'll make is that propellage, is that a word? Folks who are propelled in a successful career path don't only go to those programs as well. They go to any of these top MBA programs that we've mentioned, and admissions committees do a really, really excellent job of compiling diverse and interesting and high achieving classes, no matter which programs you apply to. So again, a lot of times I think that it's anecdotal evidence that's driving these perceptions as opposed to actual proof in research and data. And I'm going to double click into that a little bit more here on the next slide. I think this is really, really important. And that's just to look at the facts. A lot of times, perceptions are emotional, particularly when it comes to making a decision to spending, $200,000+ on a degree. It's understandably emotional, but I think looking at the facts is also an equally important part of the exercise to make sure that you're going into this really understanding the truth and going into it with eyes wide open. And like I said, the truth is there are alums from any of the top schools in any industry that you choose, even venture capital, right? Even you name it, tech or consulting. And so it's really not about only one or two or three schools giving you that entry point into that industry over others. In fact, for some industries, representation might be even higher outside of those three schools. For example, in media and entertainment, you might see more folks from UCLA than you do from other programs. So the next point I want to make is just around this concept of being a big fish in a small pond, right? It is natural and normal to gravitate towards a program where you feel like, hey, oh my gosh, like 30% of graduates are going to do this thing that I want to go do. And that is absolutely a reason why you would want to apply to that program. But on the flip side, there's also value in being a big fish in a small pond, right? Any top MBA program is going to have resources and professors and programming surrounding any type of industry or focus area that you want to pursue in your career. And if you are following a track that is maybe not what the majority is doing at your program, could actually be an added bonus because it'll give you more access to resources, right? There's fewer mouths to feed. It might give you greater alumni attention because the alumni that are in that industry are super invested in increasing the representation of their program in that industry. So again, just something to think about as you cast a wider net. And lastly, I mentioned this earlier, experience really does trump brand. At immediately graduating from an MBA program, the argument can absolutely be made that a school will provide a greater opportunity or open a door that maybe another won't. I can't say that won't happen because it probably does. But pretty quickly after graduation, your experience is going to be what matters, your accomplishments, your track record, right? The proof in the pudding is absolutely what mattered. So again, experience does trump brand. And again, that beyond that first job or maybe that 1 or 2 years after graduation, it really does come down to your performance and your success and your achievements that are going to carry you throughout your career and not just what that credential or brand is on your resume. All right, so the next one is reputation. And I will say that this, of all the arguments, is probably to me the one that has the most legs. I think there are, absolutely exceptions to this, but here's what I'll say to the reputation objection. Just the general feeling that, outside of Harvard or Stanford, or Wharton, that, my company or employers or, folks back home aren't going to even know what school I went to or won't even recognize that brand. So firstly, I will say that, there are schools outside the US. I know that the US programs tend to get a lot of focus, but there are absolutely amazing, incredible, highly reputable institutions outside the US that might also align themselves well with your goals and give you that reputation and that credential that you're looking for. So programs like LBS or INSEAD, for example, are great options for folks who don't plan to remain in the US long term, and again, can help you broaden your scope outside of the HSW focus. Like I mentioned earlier, there are absolutely industry-specific considerations for this one. While in certain sectors or niches, it might be true that you feel like, I look around and everyone seems to have gone to X school. But it's not true across the board, and it really does depend on what you want to do. For tech, for example, you're going to find just as many graduates from Haas and Sloan, for example, as you might from Stanford. And Booth and Columbia, similarly, are heavy hitters in finance, not just in the US, but around the world. And so even though it feels like those other 3 programs have a stronger cachet, you'd be hard pressed to find someone at any large financial institution who hasn't heard of Chicago, Booth, or Columbia. And lastly, again, experience trumps brand. Your resume and your accomplishments are going to speak for themselves. And so beyond that immediate post-MBA role, if you are looking to pivot back into your home country, are looking to maybe switch companies or go from a startup into something more established, for example, again, it's going to be around what you learned and what you accomplished at your company, much less so than what institution did you go to 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago. All right, so I'm going to pick a little bit on this one. And this is just sort of the all-encompassing. If I can't have the best, right? I perceive that Harvard, Stanford, Wharton are the best. If I can't have the best, then I don't want it at all, right? It's kind of taking this hard stance of like, it's my way or the highway. And I just find this to be very flawed in many cases. And I'm going to explain to you why. First of all, saying this is a little bit like saying, well, if I can't have the Range Rover, then I don't want a car at all. I think I'm just going to stay home. It's like, okay, you could, but also maybe the BMW would be great, or maybe the Mercedes would get you there just as fast. And so really thinking about, is this an emotional, right? Is this an ego-driven feeling? Or is it truly backed up by research, by facts, by conversations that you've had with mentors, and by truly understanding that for your own personal, well thought out reasons, these schools are going to be the only ones that align with your goals. And of course, if you don't get accepted or if it doesn't work out, you have this really great plan B that you're happy about. But what I've seen, and I've seen this, I would say probably in about 3/4 of the instances where we've worked with applicants who are very firm in Harvard or Stanford or bust, or Harvard, Stanford, Wharton or bust. And then God forbid it doesn't work out, that there is incredible, incredible disappointment. And that's because it's easy to be all gung-ho when you're just starting in the application process, right? But once you've invested hours and hours and hours into applying to these programs, into envisioning your future, into picturing yourself on campus, into learning what student life will be like, into learning all of these amazing things, meeting all these great people, and pouring your heart and soul into writing these essays that are painting the picture of the career that you want to pursue afterwards, and really feeling like an MBA is such a critical component of that. It's difficult to then come up empty-handed at the end of the process. And so again, opening up your mind to other options and doing your homework to really understand how can maybe these other programs also support my goals is a really, really important exercise, and one that's going to leave you satisfied at the end of the process and feeling like you gave it your all and that you have all the best options in front of you. All right, so unfortunately, the lack of animations sort of ruined my game that I had for you guys at the end, but I'm going to go for it anyways because I think it's a really great way to end the presentation and to put a nail in the 4 arguments that I just presented to you all. So what I wanted to do here was present to you 3 different, these are all 3 Vantage Point client profiles, the clients that we've worked with who were successful in the application process. We worked with these folks many years ago now because they came out on the other side. And I wanted to share with you each profile and have you guess which program they went to, because I think it's a little bit surprising when you look at these. But again, the formatting got a little bit messed up here, so I'm just going to walk you through each one. So firstly, I want you to meet Ilana. Ilana's pre-MBA career was in investment management. And her current post-MBA career is in corporate strategy for a healthcare company, for a diabetes management focused company. She did have an Ivy League undergrad in the US, and she went to Stanford for business school. And the reason why I think this might be surprising is because the 2 other profiles that I'm going to share with you might seem a little bit more Stanford-esque. But again, you will see that at any of these top MBA programs, you're going to find that folks go do a wide variety of things post-MBA. Secondly is Carter. His pre-MBA career was in equity research. And then post-MBA, he went the startup route, working in analytics and intelligence for a startup. And then he ultimately founded his own tech company that was recently acquired by a large public company. So he can basically retire now, which is lovely. But he is not a Stanford grad. He is actually a Columbia Business School graduate. So again, you can go be a successful entrepreneur out of other programs besides Harvard and Stanford. And then lastly, I want you to meet Dina. So Dina was a management consultant pre-MBA. And post-MBA, she's currently a program manager at one of the FANG tech companies. So FANG stands for Facebook, Amazon. Gosh, I can't even remember the other ones. But anyways, it's one of those. Google. And she also went to an Ivy League undergrad. And while you might think that she seems like, okay, you're quintessential Stanford or Haas or maybe Sloan graduate, she in fact went to Yale SOM. So again, your school does not define your path. And again, it really does come down to your own efforts and your own success and your own achievements. So hope you enjoyed the presentation today. I apologize for the tech troubles and formatting errors throughout the presentation, but I hope this gave you some really great food for thought. I'm really grateful for your time. If you like what you heard and you want to chat with me or a member of my team further, you can do so through the link on the slide. The URL is vantagepointmba.com/request-consultation. And we have about 12 minutes left in our time together. So I'm happy to open it up to Q&A. And I'm going to sort of turn my attention to the chat and see how many of these questions we can get through. So I'm just going to scroll up to the top of the chat here. Please continue to add in your questions and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. All right. Okay, so start with first question. Hi, Masandi, thank you for your question. You were asking, do you have any data or observations on how many pivots a person can do throughout their career? Is an MBA only for a one-time pivot? Oh my God, I love this question because I would like to use myself as a case study for this. You can absolutely execute more than one career pivot. And honestly, that is one of the greatest values or benefits of an MBA is that option value. It is a platform to reinvent yourself more than one time if you want to. And that's because an MBA is a general, it teaches you a little bit about everything. But most importantly, it prepares you for leadership positions. And so what you're able to accomplish as a leader is less about the doing, right? Less about the subject matter expertise. And it's much more about how you can lead others, how you can create a vision, how you can be strategic, make decisions, and lead an organization through difficult times. And so leveraging that transferable skill set, it can apply in a lot of different settings. And so if you set yourself down one path and then ultimately decide that your skill set or your experiences have guided you towards wanting to do something different, an MBA can absolutely help you do that, both in terms of sort of the experience and the transferable skills that it offers, but also because of the network, right? If you decide you want to pivot from A to B, you're going to have 30 people in B that you can reach out to and say, hey, I want to learn more about your industry. I want to learn more about recruiting standards and best practices. How can I prepare? Are there any job openings that maybe haven't been published yet? So again, these are really great. This is a really great selling point for the MBA, and you 100% can continue to reinvent yourself. And that's something that I did. I pivoted from finance pre-MBA into brand management and marketing post-MBA, and now, of course, into entrepreneurship. And I used my experience and skills from each different kind of chapter in my career, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for my MBA. Awesome. All right, so we have the next question from Asandi again, and this is about, are there any MBA programs that offer GMAT waivers that you recommend? That is an excellent question. Rachel, could I ask you to please drop into the chat the link to our recent article on GMAT waivers? I don't know the list by heart, but many top MBA programs do still offer, in kind of our post-COVID era, offer GMAT waivers. They are not blanket, so you have to apply for them. You have to qualify for them. But if that is the right move for you, and you're able to get approval for the GMAT waiver, then there's a shorter list of MBA programs that will accept them. Though I will say I don't recommend it. I think you're limiting yourself by not applying with a GMAT. And I think you're also, not giving the AdCom an extra data point to help make a decision about you with. I always think that a low GMAT score is better than no GMAT score, because at least it's a known. But it's a deeper conversation, of course, depending on your individual situation. All right. So Tito asked a question about what do you mean by prestige? Now, I'm not sure if that question was directed at me or directed to the conversation sort of earlier in the chat. Because a user also commented that American business schools have become overly obsessed with prestige. Well, I don't think it's just American business schools. I think humans have become overly obsessed with prestige, right? We live in a world of brands. Everyone is looking for reputations and stereotypes and sort of quick heuristics to make decisions with. And prestige is absolutely something that drives our capitalist society. And I think that business schools are certainly included in that. I think in the case of MBA programs, it is not, complete fluff. I think that prestige absolutely is correlated with value and with sort of the rigor of the education and with the sort of career outcomes that you can expect. But that said, I never ever recommend making any decisions on anything, but certainly not an MBA program based on brand or prestige alone. It should really be much more focused on fit and how the school aligns with your goals and your priorities and the type of experience you want to have for your 2 years on campus. All right. So Tito was asking about the presentation on ROI. Yes, thank you. You can rewatch the presentation on YouTube after this and sort of freeze on that slide. I'm glad you found it helpful. All right. Destacabo de Football, wonderful to meet you. Thank you for joining the presentation. 2 questions here. Is it possible to get 100% scholarships from business schools? And secondly, can I work part-time as well to cover the cost of living? So I'm going to tackle both of these at once. The great news is, yes, it is absolutely possible to get 100% scholarship from business schools. I will say that full scholarships are typically awarded to exceptional applicants and applicants that schools are sort of looking to woo and recruit away from their peer institutions. But it is absolutely possible. And if getting a 100% scholarship is top priority for you in terms of getting an MBA, then let that be, on top of all the arguments I made today, let that be your case for applying to a broader range of MBA programs. Because if you're looking to get a merit-based scholarship, of course, as you kind of go outside of those kind of top M7 and the rankings, you're going to have a much higher chance of getting that scholarship and of having the school sort of want to woo you away from their peers using that as a recruiting tool. In terms of working part-time, if you're going to a full-time MBA program, it's going to be challenging to work part-time, at least initially. Even for MBA programs, like for Columbia, for example, a lot of students do school year internships. So these are internships at companies in the city that they're doing on top of their coursework. These are very part-time in nature. But even for in-school internships, the school strongly recommends that you not do that your first semester, just because you have a heavy course load with core curriculum your first semester. You're likely recruiting for your internship. It's just a lot. You're adjusting to student life, adjusting to life in a new city in most cases. So yes, you can work part-time. I don't recommend it the first semester. And again, I wouldn't recommend sort of working just any job to make up for the cost of living. I think you're going to be sacrificing a lot of the value that you could get out of the MBA. But if, of course, you're able to get an internship, a paid internship, ideally, that's in your career of choice and that's giving you really valuable experience that's going to help you in your career post-graduation, then absolutely go for it. And of course, the paycheck is just icing on the cake. All right. So another great question from Asandi. Do we need an MBA if you already took a management or business bachelor's degree? Need is a very loaded question because I don't know if anyone really needs an MBA, right? Period. But what I will say is that there is still a ton of value in an MBA, even if you study business in undergrad. I actually studied business in undergrad and pursued a finance role after business school. So very quantitative, very much sort of aligned in the subject matter that I studied in undergrad. And I can tell you that I learned a ton in business school because you're coming to the table and you're coming to your education with a completely different perspective than you did in undergrad, right? In undergrad, you had no experience. Everything you learned was theoretical. right? Everything was paper and book learning, right? When you go back to business school, almost everything is experiential. You are learning through case studies. You're learning through group project where you're making recommendations. You're operating in ambiguity. And you are bringing your own experience to the table to help inform the work that you're doing in your classes. And so the MBA education and experience is night and day compared to what you learned in undergrad. So the last thing I'll say about that too is the great thing about an MBA is that if you did, let's say, study finance in undergrad and then you worked in banking, for example, most MBA programs will actually allow you to test out of some of these very basic core classes. Like, for example, I tested out of corporate finance and out of accounting because that's what I was doing in my career. And I filled those time slots in my schedule with marketing classes because that was a gap that I had and that was relevant to my career. So that said, you have the option of testing out of things that are purely repetitive and then using the time and gaps in your schedule to fill them with things that are going to be new and fresh and additive to your educational experience. Hope that was helpful. All right. I think we are at time now, so I want to be respectful of everyone's schedule. I apologize for the questions that I didn't get to. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Melody Jones, or you can certainly email me. My address is melody@vantagepointmba.com. Happy to answer any of your further questions there and hope to see some of you come through our website in requesting an initial consultation. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend.